What you know, Alibis? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here. It's Friday, July 25th, close to 9 p.m., so this is going to be really late getting out, but I've been busy all day with Lori Daybell's sentencing, and I finally had time to sit down and record part 3 of the Moscow files. I'm going to respect the redactions in these reports. I'm sure a lot of you who are very familiar with this case can do the math and figure out who they're talking about. But for me, I'm just going to follow the rules and understand that they are trying to protect innocent people. We're going to touch on the autopsies first off. So just a trigger warning, I will put the time in the description when this section is finished. I'm not going to dive deep into the autopsy, but just give the injuries that were sustained by each victim. For Ethan, the fatal injury was from a stab wound under his left collarbone, which severed his subclavian vein and artery. His jugular vein was also severed, and he only had sharp force injuries. Xana's fatal injuries were 1 laceration to her right lung and 2 lacerations in her heart. She had 50-plus stab wounds, mostly defensive. Xana fought so hard. She only had sharp force injuries. Maddie's fatal injuries included a left lung laceration and a liver laceration, and she only had sharp force injuries. Kaylee's fatal injuries included a left lung laceration, a liver laceration, 2 subdural bleeds, and this is where the blood collects between the brain and the dura mater, the outermost membrane that covers the brain. She also had a stab wound behind her clavicle, which cut her subclavian vein and artery. Kaylee had signs of sharp force injuries, asphyxial injuries, which is strangulation, and blunt force injuries. She had 20-plus stab wounds. The medical examiner said a lot of force was used by the suspect. Just horrific. We're going to dive into some interviews that were conducted beginning the day of the murders into the days and weeks after. They interviewed one of the roommates on November 13th, the day of the homicides. She was at a party at around 10:30 p.m. on November 12th where she was drinking. She went to a redacted house and believed she arrived back at the King Road house around 12:30 or 1 on the early morning of the 13th. Her other roommate arrived home about 20 minutes after she did. She believed Maddie and Kaylee arrived home around 1:30 or 2 a.m., and up to this, nothing weird had happened during the night. She tells an order when she thinks who came home and when, but it's all redacted. When Kaylee and Maddie returned home, everyone went to bed. She was asked about the layout of the house, and she said she lived on the 2nd floor. Kaylee lived on the 3rd floor, as did Maddie, in separate rooms. Xana lived closest to the bathroom on the 2nd floor, and their other roommate lived on the 1st floor. When asked about Murphy, she said it was a dog owned in common between Kaylee and her ex-boyfriend. She indicated Xana was dating Ethan, who was in the room with her at the time of the incident. She couldn't think of anyone who would want to hurt Ethan. She was asked if she saw any cars in the area that shouldn't be there, and she said, "No, I was not really looking at that." She woke up around 4 a.m. on November 13th, where she could hear Kaylee and Murphy, the dog, dancing. She knew it was Kaylee because she recognized her voice, and she could hear Murphy barking. She heard Kaylee go upstairs and say, "There's someone here." She thought she heard Kaylee run down the stairs, and Kaylee sounded scared when she made this statement. At this time, the roommate jumped up and locked the door because she didn't know what else to do. She called out Kaylee's name and did not indicate if she got a response. When asked if she saw anyone come downstairs or heard anything, she said, "No, I don't even know how they got in. We're usually pretty good about locking doors and never had problems before. It was just really random." When asked again about the series of events, she said she opened the door when she cried out to Kaylee and then closed the door because she was scared. She then opened the door again and heard who she thought was Kaylee, but it could have been Xana crying in the bathroom. Then she heard a man's voice say, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." She said it was weird because the statement was not in a nice way, and the voice was one she had never heard before. She called out to Kaylee again, and there was no crying after, and she did not know what happened after that. She opened the door again, and the guy is right there. She described the male as approximately her height, 5'10", or a few inches taller. He was not skinny, but had an athletic build. He was wearing all black with a mask that covered just his forehead and goes all the way around his face. She showed with her hands the mask exposed his nose but did not cover the mouth area. She believed the suspect was white but didn't remember eyebrow color or what his eyes looked like. When she saw the suspect, he saw her and he just left. She believed he was holding something near his stomach or his belt line. She used both hands to point straight out from her abdomen and said this area was black in color, and she thought now maybe it was a gun. The unknown object had an arrow shape. She seemed really unsure and said she was tired during the event. She was asked how long she believed it was from the time Kaylee said someone is here to when she saw the suspect. She thought around 10 to 20 minutes. She went on to say she was in and out of it and did not fully remember the incident. She was asked where the suspect was in the residence when she saw him. She said between her bedroom door and the kitchen. She remembered watching the suspect go out of the kitchen door and leave. At this time, she closed her door and locked it as fast as she could. She said the suspect didn't walk towards her or say anything to her. Once the suspect left, she immediately called the other roommate, who told her that she heard a sound that sounded like a firework. Now, the roommate being interviewed said she called everyone and they're not answering. She said she was in and out of it and believed everyone was just asleep. She then went to the other roommate's room, locked the door, and went to bed. She woke up around 11 or 12 p.m. and called her roommates again, but no one answered. She then called Redacted, who came to the residence, went upstairs, and told her they needed to call law enforcement immediately. She was asked if there was anything else she wanted to share, and she said that the noise the other roommate described as a loud boom, she did not hear that herself. She was asked if the roommates had shared any weird experiences in the last couple of weeks or any calls or text messages, and she said no, it's all been normal. When asked if there were any altercations at the party, she said no, everybody was normal. She mentioned that she was at this party with someone whose name is redacted, as well as Xana. She was asked if anyone was having sexual relations with anyone they shouldn't be, and she said no. She brought up an incident which occurred a month prior. She and the other roommates remembered Kaylee saw a shadow while she was taking Murphy outside. And Kaylee also mentioned 2 or 3 weeks prior, an individual was following her. The roommate said she arrived home one time and the door to the residence was found open. She did not believe the slider door was locked on November 12th, but she did hear Murphy barking a lot around 4 a.m. on November 13th when Kaylee went upstairs. She heard Murphy go outside barking as well. She was unsure if Murphy would chase a suspect outside, and she didn't remember if the suspect who ran left the slider door open. There was another interview with the man who went upstairs and found Xana. He said around noon on November 13th, the roommate called his girlfriend and said she thought something was not right in her house. She also told his girlfriend she heard or saw a man in her house the night prior. She asked him and his girlfriend to come over to make sure everything was okay because she was locked inside the other roommate's room. He said he was the first person to get to the residence. He entered the code to the front door, and the 2 roommates were in a bedroom on the first floor. They were telling him they did not know what was going on. He went upstairs and immediately went into Xana's room. This was the only room he went into. When he approached the door, it was only partially opened, but when he opened it, he saw Xana and Ethan. He didn't initially realize all the blood was dried blood in the room, and at first he thought they were drunk and left a mess. But he stood there for a moment and began to realize what he was seeing. He said the 2 roommates were uncontrollably crying, and he told them to get out of the house and call law enforcement. He then went to the kitchen and grabbed a knife from the drawer. He then went into the room and checked the closet to make sure there wasn't anyone else in the room. He checked for a pulse on both Xana and Ethan and said both of the bodies were stiff and were cold with no breath or pulse. He believed they had been deceased for a while. He thinks he left the knife on the folding table in the living room. He said others started to enter the house and start to come up the stairs. He told them to get out of the residence. He said this was about the same time the Moscow police arrived on scene. The officer told him to stay where he was at. He didn't know if anyone else was upstairs as he had not gone anywhere else in the house. And he said he had trouble comprehending what he was seeing. He was not at the party the night before. He and Ethan, however, were texting the night prior on the 12th by phone and said Ethan wanted him to come over, but he chose not to. He's known Ethan since the fall of 2021. He was last at the residence on November 12th, where he was pre-gaming for the Vandals football game. He got to the residence around noon or 1 p.m. and left around 2:20 to go to a different party. The last time he saw Ethan was at the residence on Friday, November 11th. He didn't know of anyone who had issues with Ethan and Xana dating. He estimated that Ethan and Xana had been dating for around 8 months, but he wasn't very familiar with Maddie or Kaylee. He allowed photos to be taken of his conversations between him and Ethan off of his phone. In another interview, Redacted said she texted one of the roommates at 11:20 a.m. on the 13th asking if she was awake. The roommate called her back at 11:49 a.m. and told the woman they were in the other roommate's bedroom. The interviewee said the roommate was freaked out because her other roommates were not answering the phone. She heard the other roommate in the background say, "I saw something." The roommate asked her to come over and pick her up. The roommate was texting with her as she was driving there and said 2 others were on their way to the residence as well. As she arrived, the Moscow PD units were arriving as well. She did not go to the party the night before. She went to a different one. She said the 2 roommates came to this other party after she left at around 1 a.m. on the 13th. She said she was in Redacted with the 2 roommates, another person, and Xana. She talks about Xana and Maddie were in a sorority but dropped, and Kaylee was also in a sorority but dropped as well. She suspected the girls dropped their respective sororities because of issues with other girls in the house. She specifically cited girls on the executive board who tell other members what to do, and she suspected this is why they didn't like it. She did confirm that herself, someone whose name is redacted, and the 2 other roommates were still active members of this sorority. The active members chose not to live in the sorority house because of money issues. Maddie was a big sister to one of the roommates in the sorority house. She knew that Kaylee had seen a dark figure staring at her from the tree line when she took her dog Murphy out to pee one time. This occurred about a month ago at the King Road residence. She said there had been lighthearted talk and jokes made about a stalker in the past, but all the girls were slightly nervous about it being fact, though. She did not indicate any social media issues or issues between the girls who lived together. There were no issues with girls from one of the sororities and the residence at King Road. The front door always had issues with locking, and sometimes it could be opened without the code. She did know the code to the front door and was unsure if the back sliding door was locked on a regular basis. The next interview is with a male. He did not go to the party the night before. He woke up around 9 a.m. on the 13th. Now, the young man who found the bodies and his girlfriend came into his room and said one of the roommates called around 10 a.m. and sounded scared. The roommate had told the girlfriend of the man who found the bodies that someone had been in their house last night, and her and the other roommate ran downstairs and locked themselves in a room. She did this because of seeing someone in the house and could only see his nose and his chin. She was freaking out and wanted them to come over to the King Road residence. He walked with the girlfriend and someone else to the house from Taylor Avenue. The roommates walked out of the house crying, and Redacted arrived on scene first because he left before them. The interviewee went to the downstairs door and was told not to come up the stairs. He said he did not know Ethan very well, and he did not know of any talk between Redacted and Xana about boy issues and didn't see anything odd on social media. He did recall an incident from a month prior when one of the roommates said there was a guy stalking her, but he didn't hear anything from the night prior. On the next report, November 15th at 1:48 p.m., I spoke with Redacted on the phone. She was good friends with Kaylee, but also friends with Xana and Ethan, and she is a member of a sorority. She was at a party earlier in the day at a friend's apartment at the Whites. She saw Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan. They were all just hanging out, and there were others there as well, but nobody of concern, and everyone present was a familiar person. She last saw Kaylee at the grub truck and arrived after Kaylee, who was there with Maddie. She said Kaylee's demeanor was good, and they struck up a conversation. Kaylee seemed happy and was laughing with Maddie. They did not mention their plans after leaving the grub truck. She said Kaylee and Maddie seemed a little intoxicated, but Kaylee was coherent and not stumbling or slurring her words. The next report is from Detective Vargas. On December 1st, 2022, Corporal Payne asked if I would assist with interviewing family members of Ethan. I arrived and spoke with Redacted. I introduced myself and told her I would be recording our conversation so I wouldn't miss anything she said. She had filled out an adult victim questionnaire, which I reviewed before speaking with her. She listed Ethan as being easygoing, positive, friendly, funny, and stated he did not have any negative issues or negative feelings with anyone. She listed several redacted names of people Ethan hung out with the most. As far as Xana, they had been dating for about a year and met through school. She's known Xana for a year, and she met her through Ethan. She had talked to Xana once during Rush, but never hung out with her until Ethan started dating her. She had partied with Xana, but never hung out with her outside of that. Xana was a junior, she had a lot of friends, and knew most of campus. She had met Xana's dad briefly during Parents' Weekend. She had never met Xana's sister and never heard anything factual about Xana's mom, but she did know at that point Xana did not have contact with her mother. Ethan and Xana never mentioned having any weird feelings about anyone, customer, or employee at the Mad Greek. Ethan never said anything negative about his relationship with Xana to her. As far as friends of Ethan's, she does not know much about one particular friend. He is in a fraternity and thinks he's a farmer from California. Ethan would spend a lot of time with him, and they had met through the fraternity. Ethan and that friend were very similar and would often watch football together on Sundays. They would hang out 3-4 days out of the week. When Ethan was with him, they would spend time at Xana's residence. Another friend of Ethan's, this is heavily redacted, but he was also one of Ethan's closest friends. She did not see any drug use amongst Ethan and his friends, but they drank a lot, which is normal for fraternity life. Another friend, redacted, he was the one who found Xana. Ethan golfed a lot with him, and the friend and Ethan came to their house over the past summer several times and just hung out. She never heard of or observed Ethan getting into fights with anyone. Ethan never confided in her about having problems or frustrations with anyone, and he never mentioned any issues with any of the girls who lived with Xana. She did spend time at 1122 King Road and never observed any issues between any of the roommates. She did not know Maddie or Kaylee well, but knew the other two roommates better. She said if Ethan did have anything he needed to talk to someone about, he would most likely speak to their redacted. There's another redacted name in Xana because he saw them daily. She said Ethan was an open book and was not a private person. When asked if she knew what Ethan did on Friday, November 11th or Saturday the 12th, she said she was not sure about Friday. But on Saturday, Ethan did not go to the football game or tailgate, and she thought he spent that time being at the Whites or possibly at a friend's apartment. In the evening, Ethan went with her to a formal event which was at the Hunga Dunga from 7 to 10 p.m. They drove to the event in their vehicle with several other people. Hunga Dunga was rented by her sorority, and this was a private event. She knew the majority of everyone there, and there was nothing out of the ordinary that occurred while they were there. They all left in the same car, drove to her sorority, where the girls, including her, all got out, went inside, and changed clothes. There are 3 redacted names that got into the car with Ethan to go to a party. She texted Ethan about 8:14 p.m. and said she did not want to go with them to this party and was going to stay at her sorority. Ethan texted her several times trying to convince her to come, but she didn't go, and she fell asleep around 10 p.m. She said the party Ethan was going to was just a normal Saturday evening party. When asked if she saw any weird comments on Ethan's social media, she said she had recently logged into his Instagram to make it private because it was public, and a lot of random people were making bad comments on it. People were speculating this was drug-related or something to do with the girls. She didn't notice the names of the people who were commenting, but said they were weird accounts with maybe just one follower. People were making bad comments on all the other victims' accounts as well. She didn't think the other girls in the house had bad feelings about their neighbors. She was at Xana's house a lot on the weekends, and they would often get noise complaints. She thought the person making the complaints lived in a house behind 1122 King Road, but she wasn't certain. She never witnessed any retaliation from neighbors, and she didn't know if Xana and her roommates knew everyone who lived around them. So we're going to end there today. We still have so much to go through, and that's only the Moscow files, not to include when the files that were sealed start to come out. So we're just barely scratching the surface here, but I really want to tell this whole story as best we can with the documents we're being provided. It just gets sadder the deeper you get into these documents. You think about that ripple effect of the countless lives that are forever changed because of these murders. All right. Hope you guys have a good rest of your evening, and we will see you soon.